All right. So, hey guys, in this lesson, we're going to cover Server Graphical User Interface, or GUI. Some people say GUIs. I always say GUI just because. In any event, whatever you say, it's okay by me, but let's get started anyway. So, why do we have in the first place? All right, so let's just say 10 years ago, any Windows server that you deployed in your environment had a graphical user interface, GUI, that included the standard Windows desktop plus a collection of easy-to-use administrative tools. You can employ these to configure, manage, and troubleshoot your server. Now, support for scripting common administrative tasks was still sketchy at best and involved either creating batch files from Windows commands using Visual Basic Scripting Edition, VBScript, or employing a third-party scripting solution like Kickstart, which, believe it or not, now supports Windows 10. But along came two major changes to the Windows Server platform. First off, Microsoft created Windows PowerShell, a task-based command line shell, along with a powerful new scripting language that's designed especially for system administration. So Microsoft initially made PowerShell available as a downloaded application for Windows Server 2003, but then with Windows Server 2008, they included it as an inbox feature that you only needed to enable on the server. And then secondly, Microsoft introduced a brand new installation option in Windows Server 2008 called Windows Server Core that provided a way for businesses to run Windows servers without a GUI. So that is, without the traditional Windows desktop and its associated desktop programs. The objective with Server Core was that administrators would configure and manage their servers from the command line, either by issuing a series of window commands or by running scripts. Turns out, Server Core was an exciting new capability on Windows servers because it provided a number of potential benefits for IT departments, including increased stability. Fewer installed features means fewer moving parts, which suggests that less can go wrong. Lower maintenance. Fewer installed features means fewer bugs, which should translate to fewer software updates that need to be applied to keep your server protected as well as being up to date. Less attack surface. So fewer parts should mean there's less for attackers to sink their teeth into when they attempt to hack into your infrastructure. Smaller hardware requirements. Server core systems can run efficiently on hardware that has less memory and disk space than would be needed for a server with GUI installations. You follow? The problem, however, with the initial release of Server Core in Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 was that you had to decide at deployment time whether to go with a full, later known as server with a GUI, or the Server Core installation option. That is, there was no way of switching between them after installing it on your system. So, Microsoft addressed that issue in Windows Server 2012 in several significant ways, however. For a while, though, you could still select between either the server with a GUI or the Server Core installation option when you deploy it on your server. You now could also have the capability of using either Windows PowerShell or the Server Manager console in order to convert your server between the different installation options even after you've deployed the server. Now, additionally, Windows Server 2012 also introduced a third option called Minimal Server Interface, and that included various infrastructure components to support GUI management tools, such as MMC consoles, but didn't include Windows Explorer, Internet Explorer, or the Start screen. And then we get to, beginning with Windows Server 2012, you could now completely remove the installation binaries for selected features from the side-by-side store, sometimes known as the WinXS folder. And you could do that from either a running Windows installation or an offline VHD on which Windows Server's been installed. You might consider doing this for reasons such as to further reduce the disk footprint of your Windows Server installation, or to enhance its security by completely removing binaries for any features that will not be needed on your server. So, the goal of all of this on Microsoft's part was basically to better align their Windows Server platform with the needs of the data center. In our rapidly emerging cloud connected world, more and more IT processes and infrastructure are being hosted and run inside data centers that are exposed as public, private, or hybrid cloud computing environments. So, to be able to manage hundreds or thousands of Windows servers in a large data center can only be done efficiently by using automation, and that means scripting. And if you script the management of headless servers running on blades and racks, you don't need a GUI on those servers, right? Ha! That's true in the data center. But what about Windows servers in small and mid-sized businesses and SMB environment? Should administrators of these environments follow Microsoft's advice and deploy Windows Server using the default server core installation option, just so they can benefit from the increased stability, lower maintenance requirements, smaller attack surface, and reduced hardware requirements of server core? I mean, after all, if they change their mind later and decide for some reason that they need a local GUI admin tool on a server, they have the option of starting with Windows Server 2012 to change from server core to minimal server interface to a server with a GUI. So then what's the problem with deploying server core when you're an SMB? Well, you know something? There can actually be lots of difficulties if you go that direction. See, the biggest problem is that small businesses that only have one or two servers usually manage them locally, unless they've outsourced their IT needs to a company that can manage their servers remotely. But what if the internet connection goes down, or the router dies, or there's a firewall problem? You get the picture. Well, in that case, somebody's got to go over and log on to the server console to troubleshoot everything. And that's where having the Windows Desktop and GUI admin tools pre-installed can come in pretty gosh darn handy. So, for example, instead of the management company's support person driving in to fix things, they might just phone the boss of the small business and ask them to go over to the server and log on and open this and click on that. And while most non-IT types can usually click their way around on a GUI, they can get pretty freaked out facing only a command line and being asked to type 2 or 3 lines of kind of difficult to spell commands exactly as they're instructed. So what, you might say? Well, if it's a server core machine and you suddenly need a GUI for troubleshooting reasons, doesn't Windows Server 2012 or later allow you to add the GUI features if they're needed? Yeah, but this is actually easier said than done for a couple of different reasons. First off, while it only takes a couple of clicks to instruct Windows Server to add its GUI features, well, it can then take several minutes at least, and usually a lot longer, for the server to reboot, come back online, get settled, and start fully operating again. Now, time is relative, as somebody once said or proved or whatever, but you got to remember, in smaller environments like SMBs, it's really common for Windows servers to function in multiple roles, with each server hosting a variety of different business applications. So, for example, rebooting that server to install the GUI might kill an invoicing application currently in use, and that might just result in a lost sale, an annoyed customer, or some other consequence that you would probably like to avoid at all costs if you just happen to be the business owner. But even if rebooting the server to install the GUI would have no impact on your business operations, you still got to remember that any new features you add to a server might just need to be patched to bring them fully up to date. So in other words, when you add the GUI features, you're adding them in their inbox form. Now, Microsoft's released any patches for that feature since product release. Those patches are going to have to be applied later to make your server fully secure again. So this means that there's a window of time between adding the GUI and updating it, in which your server is going to be a lot less secure than it was before you added the GUI feature. Unless, of course, you take your server offline, add the GUI, apply the updates as needed, and then bring your server back into operation again. Now, yeah, well, maybe that approach would ensure your server's always fully patched when in use. It also means that your server is going to be unavailable for more than the several minutes needed simply to reboot it. And for operations to continue in a smaller business, this option will probably also be unacceptable. So in conclusion about all of that, if you're deploying new Windows Server systems in any environment smaller than a data center, yeah, it's probably a pretty good idea if you select the server with a GUI option at installation time, instead of having to go with the default option of Server Core, because you might just need that GUI in a pinch sometime, might just save your... Well, anyway, you just don't want to fiddle around with it trying to add it in an emergency. So let's have a look at the 4 user interface levels in Windows Server 2012. Server Core, so there's no GUI features, right? Local operations can be performed with a command prompt, Server Configuration Tool, sconfig, and Windows PowerShell. That's it. Only, Server Core, only, right? Graphical Management Tools and Infrastructure. Now this is also known as MinShell. This enables some GUI features. MMC, Server Manager, and some control panel applets are enabled. But you see, Windows Explorer, Internet Explorer, the desktop, and the start screen are not. The Server Graphical Shell. So all normal Windows Server GUI features are enabled. And we've got the desktop experience. This provides some Windows 8 features, such as Windows Media Player and desktop themes. Now, like we were saying earlier, the GUI can be enabled in Windows Server 2012 using Deployment Image Servicing and Management, or DISM, or Windows PowerShell. So let's say that you do want to enable that server GUI shell using DISM on a server core machine. You do this. At the command prompt, type DISM/online/enable-feature/feature name:/server-GUI-MGMT/feature name:/server-GUI-shell/feature name:/server core-full server. Okay? Then type Y when you're prompted to reboot. And let's say that you want to enable this Server Graphical Shell GUI using Windows PowerShell on a server core machine. When you're at the command prompt, type PowerShell. At the Windows PowerShell prompt, type install-Windows feature-name-server-GUI-MGMT-infra, server-GUI-shell. Now, check this out. You may use the -path switch with the above commandlet to supply a path, either a local or a UNC path, to the binary files needed for the features if they're not available in the local server side-by-side store and there's no connectivity to Windows Update. So, for example, let's say the Server 2012 installation media is present on the D drive. Well, the following commandlet will be able to use it as a source for the required binary files. Install-Windows feature-name-server-GUI-MGMT-infra, server-GUI-shell-path, $D:\sources\sxs. The feature installation may take a few minutes, and then when it's complete, just type restart-computer to reboot the server. Now, in both of these particular examples, just omit the Server GUI shell feature to install only the Graphical Management Tools and Infrastructure, or MinShell, limited GUI. All All right. Oh, wow. Look at that. You now know more about server graphical user interfaces than you did before. Congratulations. But I want to see you in the next video because we got more in store coming up.